one more thing I wanted to talk about kind of on the subject before we potentially move on is the whole, I just kind of wanted to give my spiel on the whole open/closed border argument, because I think this obviously ties in hugely to what this is. Now, I don't know if I should be more educated on what the situation in Minneapolis with the Somalians are. I have friends who talk about it quite a bit, and I kind of gathered from that. But from what I understand, I mean, I don't know how much of the Somalian immigration is illegal per se. I know there were a lot that flooded into Minneapolis and Minnesota and the Minnesota state because of certain things that were going on. I know there's Somalia and then there's Somaliland, which is like, I think from what I understand, kind of like the not rebel, but like maybe just the people who are trying to get out of Somalia, for lack of a better term. And again, I'm not educated in this, but this is just from what I understand is what's going on. And so there has been an influx of the Somalian, group that have come into the city, into the state. Now, whether that's legal or illegal, I'm not sure. What can definitely be said is what they're doing with the centers is highly illegal. But anyways, regardless of that, regardless of what the situation is with that, I think it's important to talk about kind of my views on open and closed borders. And I've argued with a lot of people about this, a lot of libertarians and anarchists who, and this seems to be like a real sticking point. This seems it's similar to abortion in a way, and I actually wanted to draw the comparison. So let's just focus on abortion. So there's the pro-life and the pro-choice camps. Those are really the two, what we've determined as the two sides when it comes to the abortion issue. Now, I think if you were to go into technicalities, I would consider myself pro-choice, because I do think at the end of the day, the person who, both just realistically has that choice, but who should have that choice ultimately is the women. That's just how I feel at the end of the day. Just analytically speaking and just on face value, like the women who are going to get abortions they're going to find a way to do it. When you had, these laws back in the day, they would just go to Mexico and all get co-hanger abortions, right? Like you're always going to find a way to, people who are pregnant and don't want to carry to term, they're always going to find a way to stop that, right? So I think ultimately at the end of the day, using any kind of government restrictions, whether that has a positive or negative effect on that, I think actually you find when legal practices are put into place, abortion rates just skyrocket. The same thing happened after the creation of Roe v. Wade, and the same thing happened when Roe v. Wade got overturned. Because all these women just end up going, and they're actually, with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, there's actually 4 states where you can get an abortion up to term. So that's kind of also my caveat to like lefties who are pissed about this is like, you actually, obviously not in the state specifically, but like as a whole in the U.S., you actually have way more options of what to do with your pregnancy than you did previously. So it seemed really moronic for me to see all these leftists pissed about the Roe v. Wade overturn. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, you guys can now go to Vermont or Maine or I think Colorado and one other one. You can go to these states and get an abortion at any point. I think in some cases, even after term, you can get abortions, which is, that's clearly murder at that point. I guess that's another discussion whether abortion is murder or not. But regardless of that, I don't think the state has a right to come in and tell you what to do on that. Now, that being said, when I look at the morality of abortion, I think it's immoral. 88% of the time, I think it's immoral. I remember seeing a stat once that like 25% of abortions are due to not being able to provide or not being financially stable. And I can sympathize with that. I can actually wrap my head around that and sympathize with that decision. I still think it's wrong, but I think that's at least a sympathetic case. I think when you look at, rape, incest, risk of the mother, that one especially, I can't wrap my head around justifying that. Like, I'm going to value the life of my partner over this possible life. I mean, we don't even know. I mean, you don't even know if that's going to actually be a life, especially in those circumstances, right? Like a functioning life. And look, I mean, regardless, like I guess my point is there's a distinction, right? There's a distinction between the binary that we've been given, pro-life, pro-choice, because really at the end of the day, what those two binaries both have in common is they're both authoritarian in nature. One is telling you can't do that. One is telling you that they need to force people to do that for them. So either way, you're looking with an authoritarian binary. And I just wholeheartedly disagree with that. And look, I think when you look at the open closed border situation, it's very similar. You have two extremes that are, I don't even know if closed border isn't necessarily authoritarian. Or not closed border, open border isn't necessarily authoritarian. That might be less authoritarian than like something like pro-choice or pro-life. But closed borders especially is authoritarian. I mean, that's literally the state coming in and saying that we are not going to let anybody. And I think that's actually, I don't know if that's still the case, but at one point, I think after the whole Afghanistani, the incident with that person, I think they actually have closed off immigration for good. Well, not for good, but like, at least for now, they've completely closed that off. But I think when people think of like, look, here's another aspect too. You have to wonder why people are trying to come to this country like they are. And it's because of this welfare system. So, and this is always kind of the distinction. Like when you're talking about like the power vacuum argument, right? Like people will say like, well, we need a government because if we don't have a government, all these rich elites are going to take advantage of the system and do all these really crummy things. And that's true. But I have never viewed using what caused the problem to solve the problem as making any sense whatsoever. So you're going to have this government come in and say, hey, we're going to close all the borders. But that same government is going to supply all this welfare and all this, like, they're going to do all these same things that people who are, anti-open border don't like. So it's like you're kind of, it's not a good solution, right? And I think the anarchist in me looks at the situation of borders and ultimately does, like, if I were to pick between one or the other, I would pick open borders. Now, what people don't understand about this is open borders is not true open borders. It's not the same as saying, oh, hey, I have to let anyone who comes into my restaurant, I have to let them in. Anyone that comes to my home, I have to let them in. Anyone who comes to my property, I have to let them in. That is not what open borders means. What open borders means is this line in the sand or a fence or whatever that the federal government has put forth is just indistinguishable. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to demolish all the borders either. I think that's, I was getting to an argument with somebody that were like, yeah, but the borders are still there. I'm like, yeah, so leave them. Like what, like let that play out. Like if there's a line of trees and you're like, this is the line. Okay, this is no longer the line. That doesn't mean you have to cut down all the trees. It's just a natural barrier, right? In this case, a man-made barrier, right? The same as like if a platypus builds a dam, that's not like a governing thing. That's just that platypus just went ahead and built that dam, right? The same as like, so I think in a quote unquote perfect world, it would all just divert into property rights. You could even literally have like the states do it, right? And again, I'm not a fan of that, but that would at least be a step in the right direction. So if Arizona wants to make themselves a shithole and be like, okay, we're going to let every single immigrant in and we're going to see what happens, let them do that, right? If a state like Iowa is like, hey, no, we don't want that, then let that play out as well. And the market will dictate that and people will be able to see for themselves what really works and what really doesn't. The point is, like, you're not going to get any of that. We're not going to see any of that under this system of open and closed borders, right? And I think also part of the problem is that the open border solution isn't a true open border solution, right? It's like because it's not the same as just saying, hey, the doors to my house are open. Do as you will. Whatever. It's like opening your house and saying, here's $10,000, right? Like those are two completely different things in my mind. If people want to do that voluntarily, I guess fine. But when you're using taxpayer dollars, and I think that's another thing people don't think about is like how many tax dollars went to, this whole like the whole border thing, right? The deportation thing, right? And that's a whole other thing too, right? Is like if let's say you close, and I think I touched on this earlier, but let's say you want to close all the borders. That it doesn't logically like. There's a difference between closing a border and then retroactively going in and taking somebody and being like somebody who is respected in their community, contributes to their community. Maybe they don't pay taxes. So what? They have a job. They have a family. They provide for them. Like all the things that we as humans would see being positive things, right? But then because, like I said, because they don't have a piece of paper, we feel it's justified. The government feels like it's justified to come in and just completely take you out of your home. And people who have lived here for 10, 20 years. I mean, like I've known a lot of people in my lifetime who were illegals. I don't think a single one of them was someone who I would have thought as being quote unquote criminal or a bad egg or any, like they were all like kind people. I mean, they didn't speak the best English. So what? I mean, we have a phone where we can like if like I work with Hispanic people right now. If they say something to me in Spanish, I can hold up my phone and have it translate in 5 seconds. I know what they've said. And look, I do think that there is kind of, when you have this closed border argument, like it does kind of lead logically. If we're going to have a logical conclusion, it's going to be to racism, right? Like we're a predominantly white country. And if people who aren't white aren't in that country, we're automatically going to target them, even though like people could be coming in illegally from Canada or Europe or whatever. Like, I don't think they really are to that extent anyways. But like, it's not like you're just going to kind of play the race card in response to, I mean, really what the government, I mean, because the government originally was kind of a race card in a way too, right? Like they, like the whole reason like Democrats want open borders is because they want people to vote for them. But I don't think that's true open borders. Like if you have the czar has a border and they open the border up, like they can still close it at any point. Like they, in a sense, that border still exists. I'm talking about the border not existing at all. I don't mean in a sense they have to demolish it. I mean like structurally, in terms of autonomy, like nothing's being enforced. Like that border doesn't really exist. Like if there's a wall but there's a bunch of holes in it, like that's not really a border anymore, right? So I guess this is just kind of this is where I kind of fall on the line of I think an open borders type of guy at the end of the day. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to defend themselves. That doesn't mean people shouldn't have property rights. It just means this, like, if you want to get to a point where the federal government no longer exists, you have to be willing to take down every single aspect of it. Obviously there's priorities, right? Like I would rather have the military state and the police state be taken down before healthcare, but if anything that moves in the direction of we're going to give this back to the people, I applaud and I support. So that's kind of my stance on that. People heavily disagree with me on that. That's fine. But, I think at the end of the day, what the root of the problem is when it comes to this border issue is the incentives. And I truly like there actually was a point in semi-recent history where more people were leaving the country illegally than coming in illegally, right? Like it is possible for that to happen. But the thing that's truly stopping this illegal immigration crisis is the incentives of the government. So if you're just going to give the government credence and just say, hey, we're going to let them enforce this border, none of that welfare shit's going to go away. Let's say maybe it doesn't go to immigrants. Fine. It's still going to go to everyone else in the country and it's still going to devalue the dollar. Maybe less, maybe more. I don't know. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. They're still being shitholes.